course, we have this iconic screen here. I was always fascinated by the Loveless play. Of course, in Crisis Core, we learned way more than we ever needed to learn about that. It was really interesting to me at the time. I including that kind of art and culture, like in this city, they could have made it a straight up dystopia where it's all just gloom and people knifing each other in the street. Having a theater performance in the background here, or I think it was a play, that really suggests a lot of dimension to this world. You know, there's people in there. There's like a flipped over car over there, which in the remake, this is like an utterly pristine street with like a nice warm coffee shop over here where people could go in wearing their cardigans and order a nice latte. Just picturing this world where people were going into this theater and experiencing culture and like, what's the play about? And all of these interesting implications about the complexity and richness and texture of life in this city are like, so much is implied just by having that theater there. It's just a really genius choice of kind of environmental storytelling. Of course, you've got some of that kind of like cyberpunk art deco French like combination of so many different art styles, but fused in such a way as to become a entirely new thing. Of course, any possible positive sentence that you can utter about Final Fantasy VII can then be followed up with, unfortunately in the remake, those 4 words are something that will never go away now. Unfortunately, in the remake, this has all been compressed down into a very generic and zero personality version of the same place, but without any distinct character in terms of architecture, color, texture. I just love all of these scenes. They're so evocative of just the underground resistance lifestyle, you know, being in a broken down kind of sewage tunnel with wires hanging down, or being stashed in a cargo train, relaxing on the crates and stuff. The bumpiness of the ride and the loud train track sounds in their ears, you know, it's not comfortable, but that's how they get in and out. That's how they have to move. Really just feels like these guys they're real underdogs, and they're making do with what they have, which is not much. Great character building scenes. You know, one of the great achievements of early 7 is just the pacing. The bombing mission is actually not that long, and it moves so quickly onto good characterization. They could have, you know, extended, endless scenes of them planting bombs and blowing stuff up and doing big, overblown train heists, and you know, the action scenes could just continue on forever with them backflipping off of trains and stuff, and instead it really goes straight into some really quiet character stuff. These 2 early parts in the game where you take the trains to and from the reactors, I believe there's 2 different train sequences. I think this one in particular is one of my favorite parts of the entire game. There's just so much character and like interesting emotion and world building just baked into this part. It's really just bursting with kind of interesting information about the setting and about the characters. Barrett just relaxing on the seat. We've got like a homeless guy living on the train. We can really see that this is not the best place economically. It's interesting that this guy doesn't have any real, like, judgment about what the terrorists did. It's like he's almost complimenting them. He is complimenting them. I think maybe people in this world aren't so prone to the Shinra propaganda. I think I'm sure there's like an upper class who thinks Shinra's great and everything's fine, and as long as they're okay, everything's being run smoothly. But I'm sure a lot of the people really acknowledge how fucked up stuff is, and they might be rooting for Avalanche. And when that kind of sentiment is in the popular imagination, that's when a tyrannical organization like Shinra really has to start worrying. And maybe later why they drop the plate on the slums to try to Death Star that place in hopes of eliminating those kind of thoughts from having any kind of fertile ground. Yeah, dude, Biggs. This kind of casual dialogue that they have with each other, it's actually really deftly handled. The characters speak to each other like they have a certain familiarity. Like, I think the music is part of what makes it work so well, but it's not like they walk into the screen and say, I'm so-and-so guy and this is my deal. I mean, he does just say, I always felt like a sidekick, but it somehow feels natural. It's like there'd be kind of an emotional high after pulling off such a extreme act, which they just accomplished. This is the kind of quiet aftermath where they're just riding home on the train, and it feels like this would be a moment that kind of like buried emotional thoughts would come out, and they'd be willing to share them with each other because there would be a certain closeness with what they've just experienced. Just everything about this sequence works so well. This is some kind of direct world building, like she's just telling Cloud about the reactors. I'm sure he knows already, but it still also kind of works because nerds tend to like over-explain stuff. I know being really enthusiastic about certain arcane concepts like music theory or something, I'm like over-eager to explain these things to people who aren't really interested or maybe even already know, but it's just hard to check your excitement for these things sometimes. Jesse's that kind of geek who can, I can buy that coming out of. Also, just, you know, that conversation also establishes that it's not easy for them to do this stuff. Like, they are actually having to take some kind of surreptitious measures, fake IDs. She knows all the security systems. This is a really interesting line. When the lights go off, you never know what kind of creeps will come out. Always wondered exactly what that meant. Maybe like the other kind of criminals who were being flushed out by the system. Maybe she's talking about the Shinra like law enforcement, or if any civilian cops still exist. Really just kind of an evocative line. It's just the kind of strange things you might see on the train. This is just, you know, this is really just the most beautiful part of the whole game, this little exchange between Barret and Cloud. I feel like this next few lines of dialogue just make the entire game. The city has light now in the remake, because I guess they didn't read the fucking script. So, that's cool. Cloud, who has to this point being, he's been Mr. Cool Guy, and I don't care, I'm not interested, just give me my money. And he actually offers some kind of like emotional insight. And Barret is naturally surprised. But they actually, they connect over something, which is that this city is like pretty awful. And Barrett's motives are not only to save the planet from the wide-scale problem of like live stream climate change, but also all of the economic oppression that's going on here. Barrett has like all the motivation in the world for what he's doing, and as much as some people might issue blanket condemnations of terrorism, basically these sequences offer every possible rationalization that you could want for what we've just seen these guys doing. Cloud demonstrating his privilege, I guess, here. That's a really naive question coming from him, but I guess he hasn't lived in the city too long. Just small town Cloud doesn't understand these kind of things. It is weird that he kind of reverses on this. Like, if you know that, then why did you ask that question? And I think this is the defining line of dialogue from this entire game for me. I mean, the music, I think this is this Anxious Heart? A masterpiece by Nobuo, and the visual design, the swinging hand-holding stuff on the train. Jesse's like at the monitor. Biggs is having a bit of introspection about his role in life. The homeless guy in the corner, I mean, everything about this paints the perfect scene. This is Midgar, and this is what it means. It's absolutely beautiful and perfectly done. And the music continues as we see the train continue on. It's fucking masterful. This is the essence of Final Fantasy VII to me. And they can't take it away from us, no matter how hard they try. So, fuck them. Fuck Nomura and fuck Katase. Fuck Nojima. Fuck everybody. You can't take it away from us. As much as they try to execute their cultural erasure on this game, they can't do it. It's too much of a classic. I guess, people were so mad at George Lucas for years because, he decided he wanted another, like, CG alien to be in the Tatooine scene, or, just really, like, for the most part, minor changes, except for the famous Solo one, which actually changes the character, which, it's not good, but people were just furious at him. And if they were so mad at, the guy who actually made the game, the movies changing stuff that he wanted to be changed, they should be absolutely livid at these clowns who stayed at Square Enix and are now just like changing work that they have no personal right to alter. It's just really disgusting. I mean, some of this dialogue is just so poignant and melancholy. It's really great. Even this guy, I mean, the music choice for these scenes just really enhances everything being said, but it all works so wonderfully together. I want to get his first line again. There's just such a great sense of sadness over the city that isn't... There's so many directions that you could take with showing a dystopia. Like, it could just be played up for suspense, like just pure cool factor and lots of like checkpoints and cool looking government soldiers and things, and play up their kind of threat and menace. You could just go overboard with a kind of squalor, and you could just oversell the kind of like suffering, show like a guy being kicked by cops, which, that's a valid choice. any time that cops are being criticized is not a waste of time, but the direction they took with Midgar as really your first exposure to the city proper outside of the reactor being just this kind of like malaise. It's just a quiet sadness, and all of the dialogue of the NPCs reinforces that. Unfortunately, I can't. The first thing that guy said, like the line between him and the passengers and him just watching, there's something really great about that. That also reinforces, the way these characters move through, like they're checking their corners. It's kind of like a military guerrilla tactics, showing that they're still taking this seriously, even though they're far from the reactor. They don't want to be followed back to their secret base. It's a little on the nose, but it's cool that they set this up so early. If later in the story they just said, oh yeah, actually there's these pillars, and it felt like more of a narrative pull out of nowhere to set up the scene where it gets bombed right after, that might feel a little bit cheap, like they just invented it, like they just fabricated it on the spot to facilitate that scenario. But showing it this early as part of the world, which is then established in your memory and your sense of the place, it's way more effective when later they try to blow it up. Yeah, looking at the differences in art style between original 7 and remake, I think it's a little silly to keep calling things like you have a prefix and then you put punk, like cyberpunk and steampunk and whatever kind of punk that you can come up with. But that's really interesting. They're kind of addressing the possibility of like a stock market crash from the computers going offline. I'm not really sure if she means that or physical damage, but really interesting. Could be a viable side objective for Avalanche to really fuck up the professional trading class, and all the more power to them in that case. Hell yeah, Avalanche. But yeah, the word that I kind of thought of for the visual style of 7 was like a kind of like brownout punk. And I know brownouts are like an electrical occurrence and don't actually have any kind of visual aesthetic associated with them, but this game just makes me think of like the whole city running on kind of this fragile and dirty power sources that are kind of flickering, kind of a sickening yellow and green. Because electricity is kind of the central theme of the entire game. I mean, Shinra's after it. The whole conflict is over whether they should be mining it from the earth or not, and the cost of the planet in getting it. And I think the electricity angle is just expressed in all of the visual design. Like everywhere you're seeing these kind of lights, you just always get a feeling of the electricity that's all around everywhere. And maybe the cost that's incurring. And not only the cost of the planet, but in human lives. The whole visual style of the game just feels like it's really just... it has an encompassing feeling of this like flickering, dirty power that's being routed through like old cables and stuff. That's how 7 feels. Like the singed surfaces of buildings from electrical shortages and things like that. It just has that kind of visual language throughout Midgar, and sometimes even after that. Of course, there's all of the influences, like you got old cars and people in almost kind of like 1920s worker outfits from New York and stuff. Interesting fact, one of the very original ideas for 7 was that it would be set in New York, which I think later, since it was Sakaguchi's idea, later transformed into the futuristic New York from Spirits Within. But adding that kind of period aesthetic into this really science fiction setting helped to make it more of a unique place, which is cool. I think influences become really cool when someone is so diverse in their interests and isn't just getting all of their influences from one place and then regurgitating it. It really synthesizes into something new when someone has such a wide array of things that they're drawing from. The best way to draw from things is to draw them into yourself and make them part of you, so that you as an artist then have a changed sensibility in what you create. And it's not like the bad way is to draw from things to put them into your work. Those things should first be fully processed through you as a person so that they become a part of you. And then when they come back out of you in whatever form that organically occurs, then they've transformed into something that's unrecognizable. The game creators of the 90s grew up on, such a vast array of art, the progressive rock that the composers listened to in movies and books and things. Not so much their only influence being other video games, which is impossible because when they were kids, the only other video games were like Pac-Man. So I feel like there was a richness of like cultural understanding that they had to draw from, like a whole wellspring of influences. And that's what led to the creation of something like Seven, which is such a unique synthesis of things. And now you can't get that because I guess most of the people in charge are the ones who care the least and who were installed into power by, corporate boards who were really just looking for the person who was the most pliable, looking for yes men or people who will get it done on time, or in the case of Square Enix, I guess the people who will take as long as possible for some reason. Really mystifying as to why people like Nomura keep getting the director's position when they've just run projects into the ground so often before. Sure, his name was on Kingdom Hearts, and that sold a lot, made a lot of money, and in some senses, to the diseased executive mind, that might indicate a safe choice, which is all they're concerned with. But at the same time, you'd think that they could install someone roughly analogous to a Nomura who could do, just about the same stuff, but actually not take 15 years. So, did I fight with Barrett? No. Me and Barrett are cool. We connected over the tragic nature of life under a corporate oligarchy. Tifa's cool. Tifa and Aeris are pretty cool characters. They're both great. I'll give it to Tifa. Being forced to choose between Tifa and Aeris is difficult. I mean, they're both cool. I think I used to like Tifa more because I guess originally I bought into more of the concept art image of Aeris, which is that she's like the white mage, pure innocent girl who, the more standard JRPG female lead who's basically just like a romance object for the protagonist. Of course, that's completely wrong. That's all just image. Her actual character is really quite different from that, but as a result of just that surface level impression from the concept art, I was kind of more into Tifa, because she's just the cool girl who runs the bar. She, when drunks come in here, get a little bit unruly, she probably punches them in the face herself, throws them out the front door. That's the kind of chick Tifa is. And she's kind of awesome for that. Also, I like the pre-existing relationship between them and that sensation of like knowing something is wrong with someone but really being afraid of saying anything because it might like shatter some kind of like dream or illusion or something that's holding up something very fragile. Her carrying that burden and having that history with Cloud just is really endearing and makes her interesting. Eris also just a total badass, because she can play the biggest thug in town, no problem. Knows her way around everything. Guys, that's dangerous. Don't do that. Final Fantasy really twice in a row with the awesome characters, Celeste and Tifa, and Celeste and Terra and Tifa and Eris, all great. Don't really understand what the the uproar over that. I mean, she's leaning over the counter at you. I don't know if that was intended to be provocative in this little Lego 3D model, but I never really saw it that way. I guess the one part of the game they were faithful to was Tifa kind of leaning over the counter like that. So, guess the ethics department approved that one. Again, just to I don't think it can be overemphasized just how cool it is that the game just calms down into this really quiet domesticity, which is a really wonderful thing to see. Just come back from massive terrorist explosions and they're just like having quiet conversations, and you can feel a real sense of emotion and closeness between these characters, as much as Cloud is trying to pretend it doesn't exist. Little cast of rebel characters get endearing really fast. I mean, just with a few lines of dialogue. Jesse, Biggs, Barrett, Wedge to a lesser extent. I don't think he's really characterized as much. There's no real specific thing that I remember him saying or doing. Marlene and Tifa, just a really strong base of characters coming right out of the gate with this game. Good tensions between the characters too, like inserting a reason for them not to trust him but having to rely on him, and then further complicating that with his existing relationship to Tifa, who's kind of in their cell. Cloud doing some alpha male bullshit here. That is a really funny animation though, him puffing his chest up to Barrett. Like how it says sin on the state propaganda news over there. I feel like these last few lines of dialogue with Cloud in the remake, they would have periods on the end of the sentences instead of exclamation marks. And I think that's all I need to say about that. If you understand what I mean, then you understand. If you don't, then I can't help you. But I think that just about distills it. The opening hour of Final Fantasy VII really just almost perfection in every way.